The mission has been scrubbed. We have scrubbed the mission for the day because Carnarvon is not acquired. We can assume the Agena vehicle went into the Atlantic some 5,500 miles short of the desired velocity.
I think most of you know Mr. Matthews, Charles Matthews, the Gemini program manager, and he has a few observations to make on the plans that were announced this morning at the ranch.
Thank you, Paul. As you know, we are having as a very important objective of the Gemini program a evaluation of rendezvous. Some time ago, several proposals were submitted to us with respect to carrying this activity out. One proposal was submitted by the Martin Company that involved a rendezvous with 2 spacecraft. At that particular time, we were certainly pretty well cast in concrete with our particular approach to rendezvous, using the Atlas Agena as a target vehicle. And although this was of interest and from a general look at this was feasible, it did not seem to be a logical part of the program at that particular time. Subsequent to the GT-6 launch attempt, the McDonnell Aircraft Corporation representatives, in particular John Yardley and Walter Burke, brought this same subject up again with the benefit of the past look at this activity. We again made a review of this. Mr. Burke and Mr. Yardley discussed it with myself and Dr. Miller down at the Cape, and then came to Houston and discussed it with Dr. Gilruth and Mr. Lowe. In turn, the various elements of our operation, Mr. Kraft, Mr. Slayton, all the rest of the people, the astronauts, were brought in, and in each case the people went back to their specialists to go over this thought. And the general conclusion was that it was something very worthwhile in terms of a objective for the Gemini program at this stage in time, and it was something that with this type of look did appear to be feasible. It naturally is something that warrants further study and further planning and watching as the activities progress. I do want to point out, though, that it did have the background of some previous consideration in the order of magnitude of 6 or 8 months ago. Actually, the operation is not particularly different from a flight operation in terms of trajectories, orbital mechanics, and that type of thing than we had planned for the Atlas Agena. The GT-7 spacecraft, of course, will be put into orbit on its 14-day mission, and there's really no constraints at all on the GT-7 operation imposed by this mission, or at least no major constraints, and none on the 14-day duration. And regardless of what would happen in the progress of this plan, the GT-7 operation would be carried out as planned currently. Now, subsequent to the GT-7 spacecraft being placed in orbit, we recognize that we have a spacecraft and a launch vehicle that has been completely checked out at McDonnell. It's been completely checked out at the Cape. It's been counted down with no anomalies. The activity involves putting this vehicle in essentially bonded storage for a given period, taking it back out and assuming that there are no constraints on pad damage. As you know, our experience has been good on this, but this is something that will have to be looked at right at that time. And assuming that we will make a very thorough check of these vehicles at that time, comparing data that we have obtained previously with the data that we have now, we will be able to establish whether they're really ready to go or not. And of course, if they're not, that would preclude the operation that we're picturing. The launch operation and the flight, as I say, is very much similar to an Agena flight for the case where the Agena is already launched and in orbit. In other words, we don't have a simultaneous countdown. The Gemini launch vehicle and its spacecraft would naturally have to be counted down with good accuracy. On the other hand, there is a significant window provided in these rendezvous operations on second or third day operations, as we have called them in the past, so that it does look like it's a feasible thing to do. There, of course, are a number of ifs associated with this kind of thing. There are the ifs associated with the activities that we will embark on over the next period of time. There may be something come up that we have not thoroughly considered at this time. There is the question that I mentioned with regards to the actual status of the spacecraft and the vehicles at the time we put them back in the pad that we will establish. There are such things as weather constraints, in which you're actually more subject to in this particular case, because there is a definite calendar time to launch as well as a definite launch window to meet. So this is a general outline of the activity. The in-orbit activity would be carried on just about the same as GT-6. Of course, we would have very good information on the ephemeris of the GT-7 spacecraft, and we'll have tuned it up properly. Then the operation would be carried out just in the manner that we have described to you in connection with the GT-6 mission.
Okay, this of course was to be a sort of a disappointment conference. Wally, do you want to tell us how disappointed you are?
Well, I had about 4 hours to get disappointed. All of a sudden we're quite elated, as you all can imagine. We as a crew naturally were prepared for rendezvous sometime on the 25th of October and had no real prediction on when we would accomplish rendezvous until this plan was dusted off and brought to the attention of the appropriate people in management. And then, of course, when we were drawn into the loop for our comments, we immediately responded with great elation. So we didn't even get near the term so-called despondent. We were disappointed when we left the Cape and elated by the time we were in Houston, about 4 hours.
Well, my feelings are exactly the same as Wally. Required approximately 1 hour and 40 minutes to fly back to Houston from Cape Kennedy, and then approximately 2.5 hours later our spirits were greatly lifted as we learned of the possibility of the new plan, because we could see a long time delay. But I think we're both every bit as ready to go today as we were last Monday for the rendezvous mission, and the orbital mechanics and the techniques we go through will be identical to rendezvous with the spacecraft instead of the Agena. So we're ready to go.
I think it might be appropriate to add that we have seen the loss of our mission as we envisioned it with the Agena. In addition, we are asking a lot of the team at the Cape to prepare the spacecraft and the booster as they had done so well for the launch on the 25th. If the weather or other variables prevent this launch, we haven't lost anything in trying to make this mission with the Gemini 7.
Do you have a question, Jim? Back there.
Apparently, it was originally thought that you needed 6 rendezvous and docking flights, and now you're only going to need 5. Is there an explanation for that?
Jim, the program that we have envisioned, of course, involves a number of rendezvous operations, and part of it is under consideration that it's entirely possible that all of them would not be completely successful. So there is redundancy in the program in the 6 rendezvous flights. Now, on this particular flight, of course, we will not dock, but we will conduct an actual rendezvous. And what I mean by that is that we will we will be able to demonstrate a launch within the window, should this be a successful operation. We will be able to demonstrate the mid-course maneuvering that's involved in getting in close proximity to the vehicle. We'll be able to initiate the terminal phase of the operation using the same equipments that were envisioned for the Gemini Agena operation. We will be able to brake in close proximity to the other vehicle, and if desired, even demonstrate going into docking proximity. That will, of course, conclude this. Well, this represents a very substantial part of a rendezvous demonstration, and being able to do this in the present climate considerably earlier than we could before, I think is an extremely worthwhile mission.
You're cleared for takeoff.
Roger, scramble 1.
All right, here, adios. Ignition. We have a shutdown, Gemini 6.
My clock has started.
No liftoff.
Verify program reset.
No liftoff.
In giving you the DSM that it was for your great personal courage under great danger. How did you feel sitting on the top of the rocket that Sunday, and how close were you to pulling the D-ring?
My hands were on it. They were supposed to be. And it's kind of a fast 1.5 seconds for us. The training, again, is what gave us the advantage over the computerized systems that we've used in the past. If this were a Mercury spacecraft, we would have been sitting nearer pad 16 than 19 via the ejection seats. And we are quite pleased that the computer system between the 2 ears of man, as I understand Bill Schneider described it, are still quite proficient. We did have quite a bit of training on the launch abort simulator, which is here in Houston, and we were well aware that it would take 3 seconds, actually about 3.4 seconds, from ignition to the thrust buildup and the bolt release where we would have liftoff. And this was 1.5 seconds. The sneaky part was the clock starting, which is not supposed to happen until liftoff. So we did have a couple of quiet, trying seconds there, I guess, but nothing moved, and this is probably the best part, so we didn't either. Well, at that point, of course, it is a Gemini 7 mission. And the Gemini 7 mission, its major objective is as much as 2 weeks in orbit. If the Gemini 7 is in a good orbit and all the systems look go for us to join, or is it Gemini 7 will stay in orbit sufficiently long for us to get on the pad and get ready with the GLV-6 and spacecraft 6, we will continue the countdown for spacecraft 6 right after their liftoff. If the pad is in good shape, all of these variables, of course, you must understand, if all of these things fall into place, we will start getting 6 ready. At this point in time, the spacecraft Gemini 7 will be making height adjust maneuvers as they finally get to the optimum orbital altitude for our maneuver, which will be, as we had envisioned the Agena in the past, approximately 161 nautical miles, and it will be a circular orbit. And of course we have a crew on board who can do this very precisely, so we expect to see a real good orbit out of the spacecraft 7. Our liftoff will be phased so that we will go on the same set of tables we anticipated with the Agena, where we would anticipate effecting rendezvous on the 4th orbit. Approximately some 5 hours and 30 minutes after our liftoff, we should be in position to dock on the spacecraft 7. And basically the flight plan is identical to that point. Now, to describe what we feel is rendezvous, I would best say that it would be like traveling cross-country and putting your car in your garage and stopping there. That's rendezvous. Now, other definitions of rendezvous are what I would call passing acquaintances. And in this case, we will be that close to spacecraft 7 that it's merely a case of lacking the docking adapter to actually engage with the other spacecraft. Now that, of course, is very difficult and most improbable. You can't imagine having that type of hardware available with this short time we have left. You may notice that spacecraft 7 is moving slightly. They were letting their attitude drift in yaw during this time. Now here are some shots taken from Tom's side with the McDonald camera at 6 frames a second and stepped up to fill in, and you can see a slight jerkiness now, but the photography is really outstanding. You can see we had no hesitancy in moving in and looking them over. If you worry about docking, I think you only realize we need to move about another couple of feet and we're there. Now, this motion you see is not the motion that's developed with the spacecraft. This is due to the framing of the 6 frames per second. This is one of my favorite sequences here. Now you can see some activity by Jim Lovell. And Frank across the cockpit is even trying to take some shots at us. You'll even get a lesson in housekeeping from Jim Lovell as we progress here. There we go. Always keep your windows clean.
Didn't do any good, though.
We were quite confused when we first looked over this crew. Frank, for some reason or other, didn't have as much beard as Jim did. I think you can see some of Jim's beard there. Looks like 7's coming in to look us over. And interestingly enough, you'll notice they are. We are drifting around. This is the flight path that Tom flew for over 20 minutes, or approximately 20 minutes, which we call an out-of-plane fly-around, meaning that we flew in a circle around spacecraft 7. And they played a sneaky on us. They weren't holding attitude exactly, and they drifted about 90 degrees in yaw. And Tom was somewhat nonplussed when we had traversed 180 degrees, and by gosh, they were still coming around. Now there's an example of the sunlight hitting the command pilot window and almost obscuring it. Now, this is what we were talking about. This was some photograph. This is another shot of the adapter. I think we might see some thruster activity on this adapter here too. This is taken with the McDonald camera at 6 frames per second. We were quite curious to see what the adapter separation plane was. This is the reason we were looking around back there. Plus, we wanted to see what those wire cables were, and they weren't wire cables, so we were somewhat more satisfied. Well, I finally got one glance out of the window at approximately 13 miles, and then later on, after we finished with the computer and we were making our own final corrections up there, I would get more glances out, and this time I could see the docking light, and it was overshadowing the two blue strobe lights that were flashing. It was a very beautiful sight, and the stars were up there. And naturally, I was not quite as dark adapted as Wally was at this time, since I was in and out of the cockpit making the plots. But it was a real great feeling after about nearly a year's work to suddenly see our gold coming in this close and reading out the range of 2 miles decreasing. And then particularly at the end, the lighting condition is what we'd planned on all along, where we would actually swing out and pass a terminator and have the sun behind us, and we could see this reflected sunlight would be on the white adapter of Spacecraft 7, and it was really a beautiful sight to see how it grew as a half moon coming towards us. And then I was back in the cockpit calling ranges and theta, so really my view of it was very short, and Wally can probably give you the best view of it. As we approached Gemini 7 and the first point of range where we had to take over in the cockpit completely and observe 7 as well, it's about 3 miles. And somebody from another place said, when you come within 3 miles, you've rendezvoused. That's when we were really shattered. We said, we're getting in there. From here on, the job really starts. And if anybody thinks they've pulled a rendezvous off at 3 miles, have fun. This is when we started doing our work. I don't think rendezvous is over until you are stopped, completely stopped, with no relative motion between the two vehicles at a range of approximately 120 feet. That's rendezvous. From there on, it's station keeping. That's when you can go back and play the game of driving a car, or driving an airplane, or pushing a skateboard. It's about that simple. As we progressed in toward Gemini 7, using the docking light as our target, we finally came into a range of about 700 feet, and that is when I lost respect for the lights that are illuminating us now. This sunlight on 7 was absolutely the brightest thing I've ever seen in my life. My eyes hurt. It was a Klieg light carbon arc lamp completely saturating my eyeballs. They were, of course,
dilated due to the dark adaptation for approximately 30 minutes. Then immediately, without any hesitation, boom, this light comes on. Well, we even then managed to have a little bit of a giggly chuckle saying, I guess we're here. And from there on, it was a case of maintaining very small rates as we closed, till finally we were, as Tom was quoted at least saying, at 120 feet sitting. His statement really was 120 feet steady. And this was our real proud moment. As we continued from this point, we were almost directly below spacecraft 7. We eased up to what we call the SEF attitude. I might play the game as all pilots do with models instead of hands at least. If you can be 7, I'll be 6. Is that all right? Why don't you get up there? Yeah. As we kept working into the rendezvous, the two spacecraft were oriented, pointing toward each other. 7 with their transponder and 6 with the radar. And we were head down as we came into the final phase and stopped at 120 feet. This isn't a very good scale distance. And then finally eased on down just directly below them, and then came up into an attitude where 7 was leading us in orbit in the attitude we call BEF, which is blunt end forward, and we were in the attitude of SEF, or small end forward. And this is the nose-to-nose routine, and as a result of this, we got our complete confidence up and did close to about 1 foot in this position. Later, in an in-plane, an out-of-plane fly-around, Tom was flying as well. He closed to within about 1 foot. Some of the equipment used for the experiments are visible here. This is one of the IR sensor heads that is deployed when in orbit. The water boiler is right there, still there. This is an interesting phenomenon. Watch this adapter curtain move. That is our forward-firing thrusters blowing against the adapter curtain. Well, this picture here confuses everyone. The spacecraft is headed to the left. If you think it's headed to the right, you'll never make it. It'll look inverted. The adapter is pooched in rather than pooched out. Now it'll start picking up its form. You can notice the bright sunlight here, and yet the rest of the spacecraft is almost totally black. These pictures came out as well as they did due to the fact we used continually a spot meter, an exposure meter that had about 1.2 degrees field of view. This permitted this striking contrast in lighting. Now you'll notice as we progress around that we get earthshine again. Here's some more sunshine. You can see the scanner moving back and forth. That is the horizon scanner. Now you can see Earth shine on one side, sunshine on the other, and the typical white cloud layer which gave us that much Earth shine. And you'll see a terminator go across as we progress here. Notice how dark it is on one side. There's the horizon scanner I've been describing, oscillating back and forth. This is a sequence where Frank had described having an amount of water come through his suit inlet hose, and on advice from the ground, started a 10 degree per second roll rate to clear out this problem. You can see some of the thrusters firing in this maneuver. We backed away for a while because we didn't know what type of motion would develop from this. And then we sneaked in a little bit later and took some more pictures of spacecraft 7. It was sort of interesting to note that an ice accumulation had built up at the water boiler outlet, and we were able to advise them in what attitude to take to melt this layer off. If you're curious about these plus signs on the window, these are orientation lines that are on the outer surface of the outer pane and the inner surface of the inner pane, to give us roll and pitch reference in case we lose the platform. They are not reticles for the camera.
in this flight we have demonstrated that rendezvous is something that we can do as we'd always known we could, but we actually carried it out in this flight, and Wally and Tom demonstrated that it can be done just like the textbook said it can be done. Now the applications of rendezvous in the years to come will be many, and I hesitate to predict all of these. Certainly as we start developing large space stations, rendezvous will have to be used and will be used for resupply of these space stations. And of course there will then in many other applications be further uses for it. I think the most important one to us today though is the application in the Apollo program, where we must perform a rendezvous in lunar orbit to get back home after the lunar landing.
Let me add just one word to that. This program was initiated for the purpose of developing the know-how and the machines to use that know-how to do anything this nation might need to do in space. Now, this has required a very detailed examination of the environment within which these machines will operate, a thorough knowledge of rocketry, and then the development of machines to apply the specific scientific and theoretical knowledge. I think the main point of this flight is that the theoretical calculations, as these men have said, worked out perfectly and demonstrated that we now have the capability to build machines that will prove the correctness or incorrectness of the theoretical calculations. And therefore, we can do anything we need to do in space. The real question is, what will we decide to do, on what timetable, and for what purposes?
What is the philosophy, or what do we know about electrostatic discharge as two vehicles come close together? For the Agena on the docking cone, we had three whiskers sticking out, roughly 120 degrees apart, that would pick up the electrostatic charge, if there was one, from spacecraft 6 when we approached the docking cone. This is the reason we felt we would not touch spacecraft 7. We don't know what the true level of the electrostatic charge is. We've had experiments, and the number goes down as low as a few volts to a few thousand volts. We will have whiskers on the docking adapter for spacecraft 8, and will not have the problem of the discharge. We don't think it's much of a problem, but that's one of the reasons we didn't want to touch spacecraft 7.
Over here.
Question on another topic, Wally. Where did you carry the harmonica, and would you and Tom tell us any other personal articles that you carried?
The harmonica was quite a massive piece of gear, and I managed to stuff it in my pocket. In fact, I have it in my pocket now, and I'll display the massive piece of harmonica I had with me. You can see it was very difficult to stow.
Here's the jingle bells.
I might add, for facility in using this device, I had dental floss, string to clean my teeth, and a bit of Velcro to attach it to any surface within the spacecraft. To not be too facetious, it was in my pocket. I have a pocket on both arms. One pocket has a rubberized neck dam for post-landing, and I put it in that very same pocket. The other articles we carried, in both spacecraft, carried a full set of miniature United Nations flags. This was both in spacecraft 7 and 6. These are two sets. And we carried various other flags, such as American United States flags, of course, and some flags for NASA, and then minute mementos are even smaller than this harmonica, which are for our families, and I think those are privileged to our families. Oh, I should add, and you know this, we carried a Beat Army sign.